Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, I will explain you how to configure the cascading drop-down list using the view drop-down list of Syncfusion. Look at this online example. You can see here the series of drop-down list components. You can also notice that when I select a particular country name from the countries drop-down list, the respective state drop-down list is enabled now. Similarly, after I choose any state from the states drop-down list, the city drop-down list gets enabled. So now, let me show you the steps to render such a series of drop-down list components and how to configure the value of a single drop-down list that depends on another drop-down's value using my existing Getting Started application. First, let me open my existing Getting Started application where I have added the view drop-down list with remote data. If you want to know how to create a simple view drop-down list, you can listen to my Getting Started video, the link for which is shown in the above YouTube card. Also, you can download this existing Getting Started example from the GitHub link, which I have shared in the description part below. Now, to have better clarity, I am replacing this remote data with JSON data collection, which contains an array of objects with two fields, namely country name and country ID. Also, I have mapped the country name field to text property and country ID field to value property. I have assigned the country names to data source, so let me change the placeholder property value as select a country. Also, ensure whether this data item and data fields variables are assigned to the data source and fields property of the drop-down list. So here you can see the drop-down list showing country names. Now let me show you the steps to configure the cascading drop-down list. To create a cascading drop-down list, first I need to render a series of drop-down list components. So I will define one more drop-down list inside the template section. Here, I am going to assign state names as data source for this newly defined drop-down list. Therefore, within the data function, let me define a variable state data item and assign JSON data source, which contains an array of objects with two fields, namely state name and state ID. For this data source, the appropriate data source field should be mapped to the fields property of the drop-down list component. So, I need to define a variable state data fields and map these data source fields state name to text property and state ID to value property. Now, let me assign these variables state data item and state data fields to the data source and fields property of the second drop-down list. Along with this, I have also defined a placeholder property and set its value as select a state, as the pop-up list displays the selected country state names. And now, you can see the drop-down list components rendered one after the other. You can also notice that the state drop-down list component is enabled and displaying the state names even though the country drop-down list has no selected value. So, to disable the state drop-down list and to populate the state names only based on the selected country value, I need to write logic for handling this scenario. First, to disable the state drop-down list component, I will set its enabled property to false. For that, I will define a variable enable dropdown and set its value as false within data function. Then, I will assign this variable enable dropdown to the enabled property of the state dropdown list. I will also define a query property to state dropdown list and set its value as null at its initial load. For that, let me define another variable child data query with null value and assign it to query property. And I will explain about the need of this query property a bit later. Next, I will populate the state names to state drop-down list based on the selected country value. For that, I will map the appropriate state names to relevant countries in the first drop-down list component. So, let me define one more field country ID with appropriate values mapping to the state's drop-down list data source items. Then, within the country drop-down list code, I am going to define change event with relevant handler to load the data on state drop-down list component based on the selected value in the country drop-down list. Now, I will start to define on country change event handler. Therefore, let me add methods section first and define this event handler within it. Here, if a country name is selected, then this change event will be triggered. So, within this onCountryChange method, I need to enable state dropdown list component by passing the value true to this enable dropdown variable. Now, I'm going to fetch the state names based on the selected country value. So, I will create a reference to country dropdown list by defining the ref attribute to access the country dropdown list selected value. Also, I need to form a query and assign it to a variable child data query to fetch state names based on the selected country value. To make use of this query, let me import query type from Syncfusion EJ2 data repository. Look at the drop-down list components. The states drop-down list is disabled initially. And if I select any country name from countries drop-down list, only then the state drop-down list gets enabled, showing the relevant state names based on the selected country value. Like this, you can render n number of drop-down list components and configure each of its value depending on the other. Okay, let me summarize some of the important points now. We have seen how to add series of view drop-down list of Syncfusion to the view application. Also, we have seen how to configure cascading drop-down list. If you would like to see the working of this example, you can download it from the GitHub link which is shared in the description part below. If you find this video as useful, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching this video.